Hello everyone, Aishwarya here. Today I'm going to present on drivers of change and everlasting challenge for the Sundarbans, mangroves and small-scale fisheries. I was roughly 4 years old when I first experienced my first cyclone, and I've seen more than 10 cyclones in my lifetime. And I'm just 25 years old. There was a time when I first asked my grandfather what will make this stop, because the pain and agony that follow the cyclones is way worse than you can imagine. He told me that cyclones are an act of God and it's humanly not possible to stop them. As we all know, they are natural disasters that occur naturally. But he also told me about a specific type of plant species called mangroves, which grew in intertidal zones and had a unique root system that protected the people against these cyclones by acting as the first line of defense. Since then, I've been drawn to them, these mangroves, as well as the dependent communities. Mangrove swamps are essential blue carbon ecosystems, which are comparable to Amazon rainforests on terms of their carbon sequestration. Additionally, they provide a variety of ecosystem services like coastal protection, biogeochemical cycle regulation, erosion control, and also fishery grounds for shrimps, crabs, fishes, etc. Well, these ecosystems are now on the verge of obliteration, furthermore affecting the culture of millions of small-scale fishers who still use low technology fishing gear, relatively small amount of capital and energy, and also labor intensive traditional fishing methods. 90% of 120 million fishers in the world are small scale fishers and are in a desperate need of attention in terms of their well-being, livelihood capitals, as well as resilience, because their very own lifestyle is in jeopardy. They contribute to the blue economy greatly, but nearly 5.8 million of them earn less than $1 a day. Now, tell me, how's that fair? Sundarbans, my research area, is also the largest remaining mangrove belt in the Asian subcontinent, shared between India and Bangladesh, which has seen more than 35% degradation in the last few decades. 7.5 million people reside in here, where 40,000 households are dependent on NTFP collection, aquaculture, agriculture. Threats to these ecosystems, as well as the communities, are posed by both natural and anthropogenic drivers of change, which are extreme weather events like cyclones, flooding, sea level rise, erosion, coastal development, conversion of mangrove lands for agricultural lands, aquacultural lands, pollution due to unsustainable tourism, etc., which create many more vulnerabilities for the small-scale fisher communities living in the area, as well as for the mangroves. This is why my research focuses on Sundarbans socio-ecological system as a whole, so that it considers both the subsystems. So the purpose of this research is to assess the vulnerability of the mangrove-dependent small-scale fisher communities in the Sundarbans and examine ways in which they can achieve viability. Three objectives guide this research, which are to describe the drivers of change experienced by mangroves and small-scale fishers, to analyze the multidimensional vulnerabilities experienced by these small-scale fishers as well as the mangroves, to examine key response strategies of these small-scale fisher communities, and also their pathways to viability. The methodology of this research embraces a qualitative approach based on 2 case studies and an in-depth systematic literature review. Additionally, the template designed by Integrated Marine Biosphere Reserve and Human Dimensions Working Group called iAdapt, which is assessment based on description and responses and appraisal for typology, will be filled according to the findings from these case studies, as well as in-depth systematic literature review. So these are the key literature areas used in my research: small-scale fisheries, mangroves, drivers of change, which are of 2 types, natural as well as anthropogenic. One driver from each of these types were used for case studies with respect to the intensity of the impact of these drivers. Vulnerability and its three parameters: well-being, livelihood, capitals, and resilience. Viability and its two parameters: coping and adaptive responses. So, cyclones. Sundarbans experiences more than 3 to 5 cyclones in an average in a year. Flooding becomes an evident impact of these recurrent cyclones, which leads to numerous casualties, which can be mangroves, livestock, human lives, and other species. Saltwater incursion salinizes the groundwater and other waterways. Erosion level also increases after the cyclones. Some of the major cyclones that have passed through Sundarbans are Sidar, Amphan, Aila, Yas, etc. This graph here shows a total of 26 cyclones that have passed through the Sundarbans in the past 2 decades. We can see that the predictability of the cyclones is uncertain, but the frequency and the intensity of the cyclones have increased. Shrimp aquaculture has been in demand since the late 1990s and has been priced over $6 per pound in the international market. Nearly 80% of the shrimp farms are owned by the small-scale fishers in the region, but due to the advent of more and more companies and non-fishers into the area for commercializing of shrimp aquaculture by unsustainable means for ready cash is causing vulnerabilities to these communities, degradation of mangroves, pollution of water bodies due to pesticides, feeds, and chemicals used for aquaculture, and increased salinity gradient in the aquifers as well as the soils. It was found out from a systematic literature review that the mangrove wetlands are being converted in the Indian side of the Sundarbans, and West Bengal happens to be the state that harvests the Sundarbans mangroves, is now the second largest shrimp cultivator according to this graph here. The drivers of change, cyclones and unsustainable shrimp aquaculture, created numerous ecological vulnerabilities, which were loss of species, salinity, salinization, flooding, pollution, mangrove degradation. It also created several social vulnerabilities, which were loss of infrastructure due to cyclones, lack of alternatives or opportunities due to cyclones and unsustainable shrimp aquaculture, and competition caused by large-scale companies coming in, large-scale fishing fleets, and companies and non-fishers that also are active in the region. They all affect the material, relational, and subjective well-being, as well as the livelihood capitals, and also the resilience of the small-scale fisher communities. So certain coping and adaptive responses were identified and examined that could help these communities move to viability or even push them back to vulnerability. Sustainable responses like rigorous actions, rainwater harvesting, and cleaning drives were considered that they can be viable using these responses against displacement, against salinization of drinking water supply, and against, after post-cyclones, they can do cleaning drives. But unsustainable responses like migration, overfishing, illegal activities, makeshift houses, informal loans, and selling of assets, consumption adjustment against competition, loss of livelihoods, infrastructure, as well as a lack of opportunities and alternatives can push them to even more vulnerabilities that can create newer problems. So, but certain measures can lighten up the pathways to vulnerability of these communities, which is a stepping stone for mangrove management as well as a sustainable livelihoods. Diversification of livelihoods, occupation where, and occupation where there is an additional source of income, in addition to fisheries, which can be NTFP collection, which can be aquaculture, agriculture, which are also an option in Sundarbans. They can also try to cultivate fishes in the backyard. The women in the family can work together to create jewelries out of shells, and they can commercialize, market it under microfinance industries. Also, using of salt-tolerant varieties of paddy, horticultural crops uh, can also be as add to their source of income. When incentivization of conservation strategies, strengthening community groups, co-management, power sharing, stricter policies and laws, that is licensing of vessels, gear restrictions, modifying coastal infrastructure and habitats in a sustainable way can also act as pathways to viability for the communities as well as for the mangrove ecosystems. There are a variety of perceptions of on the concepts of small-scale fisher communities, which among many stakeholders. SSF communities are constantly under modification without an ideal or a sustainable target, and this dynamic nature, diversity, and complexity makes them even more unique. As it was seen from the coping responses in turn gave rise to more vulnerabilities. The need for working of viability strategies for the long-term stabilization of these communities as well as ecosystem sustainability becomes crucial. It was also found out that that the natural resources continue to decline despite major advances in existing scientific understanding of how ecosystems and human population interact, even after application of considerable conservation and management strategies. This was because of the extent of dry reserve change in Sundarbans and its impact that had taken a toll on these communities and mangroves. I did observe a negative feedback loop, which requires greater efforts to avert the rising vulnerabilities in the region. Instead of looking at it from, like a reductionist point of view, we should rather be thinking about a holistic perspective in dealing with the case. And that's it. Thank you.